Hello MV UK, it's Pete here, bringing you an update from the European Security Summit from 2 days ago. Vance torpedoed the EU and all European countries. So stay tuned to find out the full speech and what it means. Welcome back. Right, we're going to get into this. So Vance has made a number of damning statements across his speech at the EU Security Summit a couple of days ago, and we're going to check out what that means to the rest of the world. Now, I quite like this. I think you're going to love this. So let's get into it. He covers security, he covers freedoms of speech, he covers democracy. Imagine that. Do you remember that? Remember when we had democracy in the UK and Europe? Do you remember it? It used to be a great thing. We used to vote for people. They did what we asked. We didn't vote for them, and then they did their own thing. So stay tuned. We're going to go into it. We're going to watch some. We're going to stop it. We're going to chat about it. I'd love to hear your comments all the way through this, please. So if you make a comment and you watch a bit and you need to make another one, do that. And if you do like what you see, please like, share, and subscribe. It does make a difference. Let's get into it. Without further ado, I've got the clip ready. Roll the clip.
Well, thank you, and thanks to all the gathered delegates and luminaries and media professionals, and thanks especially to the host of the Munich Security Conference for being able to put on such an incredible event. We're, of course, thrilled to be here. We're happy to be here. And, you know, one of the things that I wanted to talk about today is, of course, our shared values. And, you know, it's great to be back in Germany. As you heard earlier, I was here last year as United States Senator. I saw Foreign Secretary David Lammy, and joked that both of us last year had different jobs than we have now. But now it's time for all of our countries, for all of us who have been fortunate enough to be given political power by our respective peoples, to use it wisely to improve their lives. And I want to say that, you know, I was fortunate in my time here to spend some time outside the walls of this conference over the last 24 hours. And I've been so impressed by the hospitality of the people, even as, of course, as they're reeling from yesterday's horrendous attack. And the first time I was ever in Munich was with my wife, actually, who's here with me today, on a personal trip. And I've always loved the city of Munich, and I've always loved its people. And I just want to say that we're very moved, and our thoughts and prayers are with Munich and everybody affected by the evil inflicted on this beautiful community. We're thinking about you, we're praying for you, and we will certainly be rooting for you in the days and weeks to come. Now, I hope that's not the last bit of applause that I get, but we gather at this conference, of course, to discuss security, and normally we mean threats to our external security. I see many great military leaders gathered here today. But while the Trump administration is very concerned with European security and believes that we can come to a reasonable settlement between Russia and Ukraine, and we also believe that it's important in the coming years for Europe to step up in a big way to provide for its own defense, the threat that I worry the most about vis-a-vis Europe is not Russia, it's not China, it's not any other external actor. And what I worry about is the threat from within, the retreat of Europe from some of its most fundamental values, values shared with the United States of America.
Okay, pause it there. Right, so what he's basically saying here is he's not concerned about the threat of war, of violence from Ukraine or whoever else, Russia, sorry, I beg your pardon, Russia. He's talking about democracy, freedoms of expression, freedoms of speech, things that are literally the fabric of democracy. Democracy being you can have an argument with somebody, you might not disagree, but you don't, that's it. You have difference of opinions, and it's interesting to debate those because you get to see something you're not normally privy to in your own circles of conversation. So, yes, so this is a direct reflection on freedom of speech. So, let's carry on. Roll the clip.
Now, I was struck that a former European commissioner went on television recently and sounded delighted that the Romanian government had just annulled an entire election. He warned that if things don't go to plan, the very same thing could happen in Germany too. Now, these cavalier statements are shocking to American ears. For years, we've been told...
Pause there. If things don't go to plan, it could happen in Germany as well. So they've cancelled an election in Romania. I didn't hear about this. Did you hear about this? I didn't hear anything about this. So thank you, JD Vance, for putting something that slipped under my radar on the net, on the radar. Here we go.
That everything we fund and support is in the name of our shared democratic values. Everything from our Ukraine policy to digital censorship is billed as a defense of democracy. But when we see European courts canceling elections and senior officials threatening to cancel others, we ought to ask whether we're holding ourselves to an appropriately high standard. And I say ourselves because I fundamentally believe that we are on the same team. We must do more than talk about democratic values. We must live them.
Yes.
Now, within living memory of many of you in this room, the Cold War positioned defenders of democracy against much more tyrannical forces on this continent. And consider the side in that fight that censored dissidents, that closed churches, that canceled elections. Were they the good guys? Certainly not. And thank God they lost the Cold War. They lost because they neither valued nor respected all of the extraordinary blessings of liberty. The freedom to surprise, to make mistakes, to invent, to build. As it turns out, you can't mandate innovation or creativity, just as you can't force people what to think, what to feel, or what to believe. And we believe those things are certainly connected. And unfortunately, when I look at Europe today, it's sometimes not so clear what happens to some of the Cold War's winners. I look to Brussels, where EU commissars warn citizens that they intend to shut down social media during times of civil unrest the moment they spot what they've judged to be, quote, hateful content. Or to this very country, where police have carried out raids against citizens suspected of posting anti-feminist comments online as part of, quote, combating misogyny on the internet, a day of action. I look to Sweden, where 2 weeks ago the government convicted a Christian activist for participating in Koran burnings that resulted in his friend's murder. And as the judge in his case chillingly noted, Sweden's laws to supposedly protect free expression do not, in fact, grant, and I'm quoting, a free pass to do or say anything without risking offending the group that holds that belief. And perhaps most concerningly, I look to our very dear friends, the United Kingdom, where the backslide away from conscience rights has placed the basic liberties of religious Britons in particular in the crosshairs.
That's an interesting thing. Pause the clip there, please. Right, so without risk of offending the group that holds those beliefs, well, that's just outrageous, because offence is taken, offence is not given. You only take offence if you see, hear, or witness something that you don't like. It's a free society, right? So, and he's sort of, you know, let's carry on.
A little over 2 years ago, the British government charged Adam Smith Connor, a 51-year-old physiotherapist and an Army veteran, with the heinous crime of standing 50 meters from an abortion clinic and silently praying for 3 minutes. Not obstructing anyone, not interacting with anyone, just silently praying on his own. And after British law enforcement spotted him and demanded to know what he was praying for, Adam replied simply, it was on behalf of the unborn son he and his former girlfriend had aborted years before. Now, the officers were not moved. Adam was found guilty of breaking the government's new buffer zones law, which criminalizes silent prayer and other actions that could influence a person's decision within 200 meters of an abortion facility. He was sentenced to pay thousands of pounds in legal costs to the prosecution. Now, I wish I could say that this was a fluke, a one-off crazy example of a badly written law being enacted against a single person. But no, this last October, just a few months ago, the Scottish government began distributing letters to citizens whose houses lay within so-called safe access zones, warning them that even private prayer within their own homes may amount to breaking the law. Naturally, the government urged readers to report any fellow citizen suspected guilty of thought crime. In Britain and across Europe, free speech, I fear, is in retreat. And in the interest of comedy, my friends, but also in the interest of truth, I will admit that sometimes the loudest voices for censorship have come not from within Europe, but from within my own country, where the prior administration threatened and bullied social media companies to censor so-called misinformation. Misinformation like, for example, the idea that coronavirus had likely leaked from a laboratory in China. Our own government encouraged private companies to silence people who dared to utter what turned out to be an obvious truth. So I come here today not just with an observation, but with an offer. And just as the Biden administration seemed desperate to silence people for speaking their minds, so the Trump administration will do precisely the opposite.
So just nail on the head. This stinks of the Southport incident where there was no information given out. So a void was filled by people speculating about what the incident was about and who the perpetrator was. Now, we obviously know, because the court case is wrapped up and sentencing has happened, we can talk about it. But the Islamic terrorist who was inspired by Al-Qaeda's training handbook, and we can say that because he was that, there are political prisoners in jail in the UK right now who called that out for what it was at the time, got arrested for mis and disinformation, and are now serving between 1 year to 5 years in prison for actually spelling out what is now known as the truth. They were suppressed, they were jailed, they were utterly targeted by these people. This is what he's talking about. The people, let's get into it. He can explain it for himself.
And I hope that we can work together on that. In Washington, there is a new sheriff in town, and under Donald Trump's leadership, we may disagree with your views, but we will fight to defend your right to offer it in the public square, agree or disagree. Now, we're at the point, of course, that the situation has gotten so bad that this December, Romania straight up canceled the results of a presidential election based on the flimsy suspicions of an intelligence agency and enormous pressure from its continental neighbors. Now,
okay, that's pretty telling. So he's basically called them out here and said, you might disagree with us, we might disagree with you, but we're going to talk about it. No one's getting cancelled now. So you've had your cards marked. And did you hear that round of applause? That was the most lackluster applause ever. And do you know why? Because all of those people there are on film right now. And all of their bosses in the EU, in their governments, in the radical left-wing lunatic-led governments, France, Germany, Belgium, Italy, Spain, Spain, the UK, Ireland. If they're seen supporting this belief, this fundamental democratic belief, then they are risking getting sacked for having values that don't align to their employers. Does that sound familiar? Does that sound just like the debanking scandal of Nigel Farage a couple of years ago, and a lot of people around who have been debanked because of how vocal or how active they are in terms of their views in a public space? They're being cancelled. So this is 101 of the fear that a lot of people in Europe have about openly agreeing with the position that JD Vance, the position that the Trump administration is taking in the whole world needs to be more transparent. This control over what information is passaged out to us is coming, I feel, to an end. But anyway, Let's continue. That was the worst round of applause I've ever heard.
As I understand it, the argument was that Russian disinformation had infected the Romanian elections. But I'd ask my European friends to have some perspective. You can believe it's wrong for Russia to buy social media advertisements to influence your elections. We certainly do. You can condemn it on the world stage even. But if your democracy can be destroyed with a few $100,000 of digital advertising from a foreign country, then it wasn't very strong to begin with.
Yes, JD.
Now, the good news is that I happen to think your democracies are substantially less brittle than many people apparently fear. And I really do believe that allowing our citizens to speak their mind will make them stronger still. Which, of course, brings us back to Munich, where the organizers of this very conference have banned lawmakers representing populist parties on both the left and the right from participating in these conversations. Now, again, we don't have to agree with everything or anything that people say. But when people represent, when political leaders represent an important constituency, it is incumbent upon us to at least participate in dialogue with them.
Wow.
Now, to many of us on the other side of the Atlantic, it looks more and more like old entrenched interests hiding behind ugly Soviet-era words like misinformation and disinformation, who simply don't like the idea that somebody with an alternative viewpoint might express a different opinion or, God forbid, vote a different way.
I could bang my table, and I only do that in special occasions when I'm absolutely in total agreement with what you're saying there, JD. Did you hear this? That there are politicians and leaders that have been excluded from these conversations here at this summit because of the views they have. What he's saying is that those people that you've excluded because of your narrative, they are representing constituents, tax-paying constituents, I might add, the people who are paying for your globalist projects. He's saying, how dare you exclude people because they don't agree with you. This is fantastic, JD Vance. Roll a clip.
Or, even worse, win an election. Now, this is a security conference, and I'm sure you all came here prepared to talk about how exactly you intend to increase defense spending over the next few years in line with some new target. And that's great, because as President Trump has made abundantly clear, he believes that our European friends must play a bigger role in the future of this continent. We don't think, you hear this term, burden sharing, but we think it's an important part of being in a shared alliance together that the Europeans step up while America focuses on areas of the world that are in great danger. But let me also ask you, how will you even begin to think through the kinds of budgeting questions if we don't know what it is that we are defending in the first place? I've heard a lot already in my conversations, and I've had many, many great conversations with many people gathered here in this room. I've heard a lot about what you need to defend yourselves from, and of course that's important. But what has seemed a little bit less clear to me, and certainly I think to many of the citizens of Europe, is what exactly it is that you're defending yourselves for. What is the positive vision?
So I'll just pause it there. That's a great thing he's just said. How do we know what money we need to get together for defence spending if we don't know what we're defending? Very powerful. Read between the lines. He's talking about democracy. We fought against Hitler in the 1940s. Well, twice actually, but in the 1940s because of his fascist regime, because of his complete control over free speech, because of his utter anti-Semitism, racism to certain demographics of the world, heinous behaviour. So what are we fighting for? Democracy, freedom of speech, a free Western world. This is what he's trying to drill into. He wants to know where the EU is going. I'm intrigued. Let's carry on.
Vision that animates this shared security compact that we all believe is so important. And I believe deeply that there is no security if you are afraid of the voices, the opinions, and the conscience that guide your very own people. Europe faces many challenges, but the crisis this continent faces right now, the crisis I believe we all face together, is one of our own making. If you're running in fear of your own voters, there is nothing America can do for you. Nor, for that matter, is there anything that you can do for the American people who elected me and elected President Trump. You need democratic mandates to accomplish anything of value in the coming years. Have we learned nothing that thin mandates produce unstable results? But there is so much of value that can be accomplished with the kind of democratic mandate that I think will come from being more responsive to the voices of your citizens.
There, I'll pause it there. That's critical. If you don't have the respect of your people that voted you there, you don't have anything of value to the USA. The US are all, since Trump and Vance come to power, they're all about transparency. They're all about showing you what they are doing for you. The stark difference between the EU and the American administration is the people voted for the American administration. No one voted for the EU. Did you remember going to your ballot locally and saying that you wanted Ursula von der Leyen as the president of the EU? No, I missed that ballot as well. That's because it's not a democracy. They're dictators. They choose who's in charge, and it's not for the bettering of the EU countries. It's for the furtherment of their power, and we'll come to that in a little while. Let's carry on.
If you're going to enjoy competitive economies, if you're going to enjoy affordable energy and secure supply chains, then you need mandates to govern, because you have to make difficult choices to enjoy all of these things. And of course, we know that very well in America. You cannot win a democratic mandate by censoring your opponents or putting them in jail, whether that's the leader of the opposition, a humble Christian praying in her own home, or a journalist trying to report the news. Nor can you win one by disregarding your basic electorate on questions like who gets to be a part of our shared society. And of all the pressing challenges that the nations represented here face, I believe there is nothing more urgent than mass migration. Today, almost 1 in 5 people living in this country moved here from abroad. That is, of course, an all-time high. It's a similar number, by the way, in the United States, also an all-time high. The number of immigrants who entered the EU from non-EU countries doubled between 2021 and 2022 alone, and of course it's gotten much higher since. And we know this situation, it didn't materialize in a vacuum. It's the result of a series of conscious decisions made by politicians all over the continent and others across the world over the span of a decade. We saw the horrors wrought by these decisions yesterday in this very city.
It's doubled in 2021 to 2022 and not slowed down since. What we've got here is a guy who's seen what's happening and he's calling it out for what it is. He's calling a spade a spade. The amount of illegal migration, not irregular. There's nothing irregular about breaking into a country. It's illegal. You broke the law by coming in without an invite, so you're illegal. Don't fall for the narrative from the Labour Party of irregular. No. That's softening that down, and we don't want to tolerate that. These are seriously wrong people coming to our country, and they're wrong, seriously wrong, because they're coming on boats. If they were right, they would have a visa, they would have a passport, they would have a reason to come, but they don't. So you've got to assume they are the dregs, the bottom of the barrel, the absolute knuckle draggers from the third world country designed to hurt, maim, kill and destroy us. So no, we don't have a regular migration, we have a legal migration. And the problem with illegal migration, as JD Vance is about to cover in a moment, is you're bringing people in who fundamentally hate the West. They hate our values, they hate our way of life, they hate our freedoms. And you can tell this. You can tell this because only this weekend just gone, we've had 3 different attacks. One in Sweden, one in Austria, and one in Germany, all by illegal immigrants, all who hate the West. That's 3 cities in 3 countries in the European continent that apparently are isolated incidents. But if you look at last weekend and the weekend before and the weekend before that, there's always an incident. This is serious. JD, tell us some more, please.
And of course, I can't bring it up again without thinking about the terrible victims who had a beautiful winter day in Munich ruined. Our thoughts and prayers are with them and will remain with them. But why did this happen in the first place? It's a terrible story, but it's one we've heard way too many times in Europe and unfortunately too many times in the United States as well. An asylum seeker, often a young man in his mid-20s, already known to police, rams a car into a crowd and shatters a community. How many times must we suffer these appalling setbacks before we change course and take our shared civilization in a new direction? No voter on this continent went to the ballot box to open the floodgates to millions of unvetted immigrants. But you know what they did vote for? In England, they voted for Brexit, and agree or disagree, they voted for it. And more all over Europe, they're voting for political leaders who promise to put an end to out-of-control migration. Now, I happen to agree with a lot of these concerns, but you don't have to agree with me. I just think that people care about their homes, they care about their dreams, they care about their safety and their capacity to provide for themselves and their children. And they're smart. I think this is one of the most important things I've learned in my brief time in politics. Contrary to what you might hear a couple mountains over in Davos, the citizens of all of our nations don't generally think of themselves as educated animals or as interchangeable cogs of a global economy. And it's hardly surprising that they don't want to be shuffled about or relentlessly ignored by their leaders. And it is the business of democracy to adjudicate these big questions at the ballot box. I believe that dismissing people, dismissing their concerns, or worse yet, shutting down media, shutting down elections, or shutting people out of the political process protects nothing. In fact, it is the most surefire way to destroy democracy. And speaking up and expressing opinions isn't election interference. Even when people express views outside your own country, and even when those people are very influential. And trust me, I say this with all humor, if American democracy can survive 10 years of Greta Thunberg scolding, you guys can survive a few months of Elon Musk.
Correct. Measure of the Europeans, they are not listening to a word of what he's saying. He's talking for the people. We all know the EU bureaucracy talk for themselves. They are hating this speech. Anyway, let's continue.
But what German democracy, what no democracy, American, German, or European, will survive is telling millions of voters that their thoughts and concerns, their aspirations, their pleas for relief are invalid or unworthy of even being considered. Democracy rests on the sacred principle that the voice of the people matters. There's no room for firewalls. You either uphold the principle or you don't. Europeans, the people, have a voice. European leaders have a choice. And my strong belief is that we do not need to be afraid of the future. You can embrace what your people tell you, even when it's surprising, even when you don't agree. And if you do so, you can face the future with certainty and with confidence, knowing that the nation stands behind each of you. And that, to me, is the great magic of democracy. It's not in these stone buildings or beautiful hotels. It's not even in the great institutions that we have built together as a shared society. To believe in democracy is to understand that each of our citizens has wisdom and has a voice. And if we refuse to listen to that voice, even our most successful fights will secure very little. As Pope John Paul II, in my view, one of the most extraordinary champions of democracy on this continent or any other, once said, "Do not be afraid." We shouldn't be afraid of our people, even when they express views that disagree with their leadership. Thank you all. Good luck to all of you. God bless you.
Wow. Okay, let's take that down for a moment. There you go. So that was the full 19 minutes unedited speech that definitely the Europeans will be trying to suppress the hell out of off the internet now. JD Vance is given a green light to the citizens of Europe to stand up and push for our rights of a democratic society. The fact that the Romanians cancelled the presidential elections because they were concerned about Russian interference is abominable. Absolute joke. And do you know why? Because we've got people like Keir Starmer sending 100 activists to the USA to influence and steer the direction towards the Democrats and the globalist agenda of control. Now, that didn't work because the people united in the United States of America stood up. They come out in their droves and they said no more of this and voted for the Trump administration. Now, JD Vance is doing a great job right now of feeling the collar of Europe and saying it's not up to you. Your people put you there. So do what they're asking or stand aside. And that's the risk that we're running in Europe at the moment. If we keep letting the governments control the narrative, control our thoughts, control our speech, control our freedoms of speech, then we are in a rat race to the bottom, people. Anyway, that was fantastic. I'm conscious this was a long episode. If you liked what you saw here, please like the video, share it, subscribe to it, hit the bell notification. One of the best things you can do me at this stage of the channel is to go and watch another video. If you find something there you like, watch that. If not, hit a playlist, go to bed. It'll do me a world of good. But in the meantime, that's Peter MV UK. Have a good evening. I'll see you on the next one.